Hello and welcome to today's live chat. It's coming to you from London. I'm not in my vehicle as I usually am when I do these things. And today I'm going to talk about something which happened 40 years ago, more or less to the day, because it's very hard to say precisely when this strike actually started. The miners' strike of 1984 was a absolutely deciding moment in the history of British industrial relations. And not only that, I think it had an international effect. Now, for those of you who've seen my things in the past and we've talked about my own experiences and as an eyewitness to things such as Russia in the 90s, such as violence in Poland, its solidarity in the 1980s, or Ukraine at the present, and other things. In this case, if you're expecting an eyewitness account, you're not going to get one. I come from a coal mining area where I grew up. Okay, in my own family, nobody worked down the mine. Down a mine. But when I went to school, lots of the people my schoolmates, their fathers worked down coal mines, and so I feel as though I am within this environment. Now, where I come from, there were three industries which people worked in. That's coal mining, that's steel production, or shipbuilding. And so the three things which are really important. In the middle of the 19th century in Newcastle, for example, along the River Tyne produced something like 3/4 of all the ocean-going or sea-going ships in the world. And so they had this huge impetus. Indeed, the Industrial Revolution, which started in the United Kingdom in the middle of the 18th century, is to a large extent, I think, based on coal. Now, what I'm going to do here, though, even though I'm not an eyewitness to the events which I'm going to describe, by this time I was a student. I was in London, but I'm talking to people who were around there, and I've got very strong opinions on what actually happened then. So anyway, if you don't disagree with anything, of course, as always, you can say this is a live at the moment. So if you actually say it during the live, then that can respond immediately. And if it's later, and you put it in the comment section. I need to point out that I haven't actually prepared this, so when I do things, I'm talking about my own experiences. I try to remember things as they were, and so I'm now, although I wasn't directly involved in this strike or saw things to do with the strike, I am at the same time trying to remember things from the time. So I'm unprepared. Unlike when I talk about Hitler or something like that, I didn't actually know him personally, contrary to popular opinion. Now, the coal mining industry in the United Kingdom was incredibly important. In just before the peak of it was in 1913, but in 1920 there were approximately 1.2 million, just under 1.2 million people. So of a population around 48 million people, 1.2 million working in the mining industry. It started, however, then that was its peak, but it started to drop. The biggest drop, though, it did sort of plateau this drop during the Second World War, which continued to about the almost the end of the 1950s, and then it was a steep decline as time went by. Now, one thing also I need to point out is to sort of correct a commonly held opinions that the miners who worked in coal mining certainly in the northeast, where I come from, before the First World War, were relatively well off. They worked on a system whereby they would be paid for the amount of coal that they pulled out of the ground. Obviously, things like coal can be mixed up with other things, such as rock coal and you can and somebody would actually decide how much coal was in the buckets, these big wagons that came out. And but they good miners could earn very good wages, and certainly many of them were on similar to what doctors, for example, would be earning. So from that point of view, if you go into older maybe not now, but older miners' places, and you could see sort of very expensive furniture or sort of intricately made things of this nature. And so the poverty in mining areas actually happened later, in the beginning of the 1920s, when the industrialization, which had happened above all, for example, in places such as Germany or in Poland, and which was far superior because the coal mines there were easier to operate. And so I recently, 5-6 years ago, I read George Orwell's account, The Road to Wigan Pier. And in that, so this is now in the early 1930s, and you've got these what to me seemed like pretty horrendous accounts of the poverty in the coal mining areas and the conditions. Now, in some coal seams, you could have a seam which is really big, such as, for example, what existed in Nottinghamshire in the United Kingdom, where you could drive lorries down these things to places where, for example, in George Orwell's account, when he actually describes how the miners have to crawl through, getting their backs scratched into these cavernous areas, and then sort of they come out into a larger area where they can then start doing their work. So the idea of the poverty is something which is later. But one thing that I can distinctly recall is a couple of things which I sort of grew up with, if you like, as part of the tradition of the area. Is the first thing is the accidents which happened, and this is very much part, at least it was in my time, very much part of the tradition. You'd have a mine which in a Durham coalfield where it could have collapsed. These collapses happened in the 19th century, but something 100 people killed, 200 people killed, things of this nature. This wasn't that unusual, and these big disasters happened once every 10 years or so. One of the mines, there's even one mine I can recall where it happened 3 times, where there was major disasters in the 19th century. Obviously, deaths by the time of the 20th century was much less, and safety and all the rest of it was much more important. But of course, the things still happen these days, and I'm not talking about countries such as China, where they probably don't care too much about how people the health and safety, but in even like the United States, it wasn't not so long ago there was something happened in a mine. Now, next thing which happened, and this is very, very much was certainly when I was growing up, it was the problems that the health. And there's something called black lung, and I can't remember the correct medical term for it, but this is from breathing the coal dust, and then there's the coughing and what happens afterwards. And this is something I'm actually, for me, I'm extremely grateful for that I was born when I was born, because had I been born maybe 50 or 60 years earlier, at my age that I'm at now, I could have been physically absolutely finished. Because of the working conditions that existed at the time. So these are things which I think are particularly important to consider. Next thing is within mining communities as such, as you would get a mine and the entire village was based around the community, worked around this mine. Now, let's say I've just got a few figures in my head now. 1,000 people worked in the mine, let's say, and if you had therefore, let's say, 4,000 people working in ancillary services to that mine, which normally I think 5 to 1 is a reasonable, or 4 to 1 is a reasonable assumption, 5,000, let's say 40% of the population is working, so 12,000 people in a village. What's a small town, really, isn't it? But if that mine goes, you may be only 1,000 people, but all the businesses are dependent on that mine. So it depends. So you've got people who do the sort of other jobs, like the people who fix cars, people who fix furniture, the upholsterers, the people who work in shops, the people who do other businesses that make the clothes for the miners, and all the rest of it. These people would also lose their jobs if the mine went. And so this is a good morning. That this is a problem with closures. Now, certainly since the end of the 1950s, the mines had been closing in the United Kingdom, and there's a number of reasons for this. I mean, first of all, the use of coal is almost entirely for power stations by this time. Almost entirely. There were some other, but right, the railway stopped using it. I can recall seeing steam engines. I can recall hiding from them as a child, but I can't actually recall seeing them. But I can remember the steam and sort of hiding. There's people using them in homes. Okay. Oh, there's the word. Colin just wrote the word pneumoconiosis. Yeah, I couldn't remember it. This situation, I think, for miners was that they had a product which was no longer being used. My parents did have there was a coal fire, but that went. And I can vaguely recall it, of course, but when they bought a house in 1964, which was called, but amongst my friends, I can say this, certainly, I mean, by the time I left school, a very few of them had coal fires. They did exist, but there was few, not many of them. So the use for coal was declining, certainly as well. By the 1980s, you had the nuclear was in France, for example. I can recall when I was at school, it was, I think, something like 75%. Maybe I got that wrong, but a huge amount of the energy came from nuclear power. So there was these other forms of energy. Now, in the United Kingdom, the government from 1970 to 1974 was a Conservative government. The Edward Heath Prime Minister, and that government was brought down by a strike in the coal industry. The miners went on strike. There was even something called 3-day week, so people were going to work for 3 days only because the miners weren't producing the coal which was needed to get people for the energy and all the rest of it. And that showed the power of the miners, and then the miners weren't particularly militant. The next government, Labour government from 1974 to 1979, also, to a large extent, it could be argued, was brought down by strikes, not necessarily in the mining industry, but strikes which happened what was called the Winter of Discontent, when the government tried to introduce a way for fighting inflation, and pay rises wouldn't allow pay rises above a certain amount. And for the coal miners, there's one character, and this character is really central to the story. He's still around. His name is Arthur Scargill. He came head of the National Union of Miners. Scargill was born in 1938, somewhere in Yorkshire, I can't remember where, and at the age of 15, he went down the pit. So it'd been about 1953. In his 30s, he was very active. In his 30s, he even went off to the Soviet Union. His father was a communist. He started engaging with these communist youth. In Soviet Union and other places. He was a communist. And although he probably would have denied it, and there will be people saying, well, he wasn't really a communist or something like that. But and he took over the National Union of Miners. Now, there had been talk of strikes in the past, but then these strikes had been averted. There had been a couple of ballots asking miners if they would take strike action to stop pit closures. And now, by this time, if I remember rightly, every ton of coal that was pulled out the ground was losing the taxpayer. I'll come to that. £3 per ton of. That's what. So it was clearly a business which had to be supported by the taxpayers. So people who are actually doing work and they're making profit, or they're actually contributing to society, had to subsidize the coal mines. Now, there are industries in the United Kingdom. I mean, the privatized, those industries which were in the public sector. For example, the steel industry. I can remember it losing £500 million a year in 1982. Although I believe it was it was losing even more previously. Now, if an industry which was losing £500 million in 82, which £500 million has to come from somewhere, by the end of the 80s was actually making £200 million, and that's supposing that some 40% of that ended up back with the government. So that was then contributing £80 million a year. That surely is the best argument for privatization. Now, privatizing the pits, of course, would have been possible, but as far as the NUM, National Union of Miners, was concerned, certainly as far as Scargill was concerned, economics didn't enter into it. Scargill, being a communist, doesn't accept that 2 + 2 = 4. In fact, Scargill, I can recall him in interviews saying the only reason he accepted the closure of a pit was for the fact that there was no coal there whatsoever, irrespective of how much it might cost to actually get that coal out. I have actually also read that he said, though I didn't see this, I just read it, so he may have been misquoted, that he would not even accept, for a reason of the exhaustion of coal, that a pit should be closed. Believing that if somebody else invested the money to get it out, then that was the reason. They had to keep investing to find where the coal was. There was a very large coal field in a place called Selby. I can recall this place, driving past it, because there was this enormous power station in Selby, in North Yorkshire. And this was an enormous sort of a super pit which was about to come online. In fact, there was believed that the amount of coal that was there, that would certainly keep they could produce some, I can't remember the figures, but at least into 40 years, until today. There was so much there, and it couldn't be done by open cast mining. Now, I can remember as a child also there was open cast mine, and then when they covered it, it was you couldn't tell it was ever there. But of course, it's not always possible to have an open cast mine, as well. Something that might be so deep down that any other form of mining is impossible. Now, in I think it was the 6th of March 1984, there was one coal mine that came out on strike, and then others actually followed it. And Scargill, around the 13th, I can't quite remember the date now off the top of my mind, made a general strike. And the reason for the strike was this: is that it was saying that they had no more pit closures. Now, the logic of something like this: you're not going to close the pit, you're not going to close pits because and they're going to stop the pits closing by going on strike. I mean, it's totally illogical. But as far as Scargill was concerned, he was a communist. And 2 and 2 doesn't equal 4. He didn't care. His objective was not to save pits, but his objective, I believe, was to create anarchy. Now, you've got these small communities, and now bearing in mind that there was no vote for a strike, and indeed when they had put this to, more people were against strikes than were for them. Now, this utterly split the communities, and as I recall, the biggest, what is, as a general rule, it was the younger ones who wanted to go on strike, and the older ones who didn't. As more or less, I mean, somebody will probably come with examples saying that my father wanted to go on strike and I didn't. But as a general rule, it was the younger ones who tended to be more militant. Now, the government had been re-elected in 1983, and this was. I would say fair to say it was more or less a landslide. I don't like words like this in with the electoral system that exists in the United Kingdom, but it was more or less a landslide, and so there's a huge majority for the Conservative government. Scargill was against this, and he did even say this. I think he even said it at the TU Trade Unions Congress. Or maybe I got that one wrong, but he did say that he was in favor of direct action to bring down the government. Now, the problem with these, when you've got strikes in small communities like this, and when some people want to work and others don't. Now, Scargill used a tactic called the flying picket. Now, under the legislation, which I think came into force in 1981, things like secondary picketing, that's to say, all right, I'm on strike now, so I go and picket other YouTubers or something. You've got one factory making chocolate, they go on strike, and then they also picket a completely different company, so that company also cannot actually produce. That's got that secondary picketing. Now, that was theoretically illegal, but what Scargill would do, he'd get these groups of very organized groups of flying pickets. That's to say, he would take pickets from one place and then bus them to wherever they were needed. Now, this created huge amounts of intimidation, and there were people who wanted to work, who could be they could be attacked and all this. But in a small community, then when you've got one group that wants to strike and another that doesn't, and as a rule, it's those that want to strike who are likely to be the militant ones, who are likely to be the more violent, and then they would even attack, physically attack, and prevent people from going to work, but also the bullying outside of that, where you'd have things like stones being thrown into the houses of people who were working, or their children, the children of the workers being bullied by the children of the strikers, or the wives being assaulted, or even things of this nature, which became very, very common. Now, if I think this is precisely what Scargill wanted. Of course, he wanted to divide society, and so his mind as a communist, it didn't make any difference who actually suffered as a result. Now, it is clear that if a pit closes, then that village is, well, I'm saying doomed because something else has happened, but I mean, you can get huge amounts of unemployment. So I recall high unemployment when I left. There was 36% unemployment in the town I come from. So that's the sort of thing which happens when you take away the one industry. But the question that cannot be answered is, how do you actually finance it? Now, had the government turned around to Arthur Scargill and said, I'll tell you what then, you can have the mines, or you let the local miners own them, be a worker, and that would have been the answer. Let them run the mines, you can have them free of charge. That's indeed, maybe even give them a little bit of cash to get them going, something along those lines. Then that would have solved the problem and have been genuine worker control, and it would not have been the responsibility of the taxpayer. And you may think that that's entirely unrealistic, but there was one company that was sort of national privatized in that way, and so why not? That would make more sense. It also need to point out as well, if you lose your job. Now, if you lose your job in 25 or 30 or something, then it doesn't make much difference. But think of the person may have been down the mine 25 years and is only 40 years old. So it went down the mine 15, and that person cannot really and logically get another job. So at 40, they're more or less finished, and so that is a problem. I mean, I have heard cases of when there's huge amounts of the problems with mental health and things are like this because they can't get work and they can't retrain, and this is to be actually understood. There were this strike ended after a year in defeat. Now, what I can recall very clearly is that people going back, gradually more and more people were going back to work, and but other things which happened were that there's sort of in some places where women actually sort of took over to a large extent from men. So there were picket lines. There'd be women on the picket lines, their wives, and all the rest of it. I, as a student, actually attended something. It was organised, I think, by the Socialist Workers' Party. I wasn't a member of this organisation, I must point out. But I went just to listen to that and how they were saying. First of all, it was pretty odd because the only person that had a working class background was me, and so we had all these sort of kids who were relatively well off, and they had with no idea, with the Marxist slogans in their mind, but no idea what it was really like. But the idea that the women who had taken the role of men, and this was a blow for women's for women's equality, because certainly I can recall a women's place was certainly different from that of a man, and a lot of responsibility on women to look after the home, whereas the man was supposed to go out and get the money in. And anyway, so the miners were forced to go back to work because they had no money, and Scargill then stayed on as as you said, National Union of Miners. Now, in around 1990, there was a program called the Cook Report, which is on YouTube, and sorry, it was anyway, and there was also the Daily Mirror printed the allegations against Scargill. For example, he got £1 million from a Russian miners union, a Soviet miners union, I should say, and he'd got money in cash from Gaddafi, and this money had sort of ended up in his account and things of this. Now, a number of accusations were made in these, and some of them were proved that I think the Daily Mirror did have to make an apology on some of them, but not all. Scargill claimed that he'd been badly advised as well, but I mean this is in my opinion utterly nonsensical. If he'd got £1 million from the Soviet Union, then what that £1 million should have gone into was to do things like maybe he could have used £1 million worth of food could have been bought, and then that could have been distributed to those who were on strike. That wasn't, because in many cases, many families, only money they had was the family allowance of something like that, which was paid for the children, and that was it. And so I mean, the something like this isn't going to pay the mortgage or anything else of that nature. The fact of the matter is that what Scargill, I think, got what he wanted. He said he wanted to stop pit closures and create, but I think all he wanted to do was to ensure that the mining industry was destroyed, because this was part of the his communist ideology, that you've got to destroy things in order then to rebuild them in his socialist utopia. So the mines by what now there are, I don't think there's any. I think there's one mine which is now going to be opened in Lancashire, but there aren't mines anyway. They're all closed, and now and this is one of the things said that okay. That Scargill wanted to stop the mine closures. That's often what he said, but personally, I don't believe it. Anyway, let's have a look at some of the questions. Sorry, I've got to touch the screen because I've noticed in the past. Anyway, so Frenzel writes, there was also a large number of Australian unions who went on go-slows, collecting donations for striking miners, refusing to work or unload, even refusing to refuel British vessels. Yeah. Now, during the strike. Now, this is quite amusing because therefore Scargill. Now, Australia is one. I think it's the largest supplier of coal. I might be wrong. I can recall though seeing coal being unloaded from Australia being unloaded at Newcastle. And now today there's this huge this coal port where coal is unloaded. Now the Soviet Union stopped supplying coal to the United Kingdom during the strike for support for its international solidarity, but Poland didn't. So Scargill, who had criticized the Solidarity for going on strike, and he criticized he wouldn't show support. Now there had been a lot of support for the striking trade unions in Poland, but Scargill wouldn't join. He just criticized them. He said that the socialist countries, as he would have termed them, are doing their best for workers, whereas the capitalist countries just want to exploit workers. Now, in fact, obviously, the exploitation was being done by him. I don't think his pay was ever stopped during the miners' strike, for example. But Scargill, but he went to the Polish embassy to complain at this. So at the time that, this communist is going to the communist country, the embassy of a communist country, to complain. On each them supplying coal to this Margaret Thatcher's government. So it was a bit absurd situation. Scargill, incidentally, one thing about a person who crosses a picket line is called a scab, and so that's a person who wants to actually work, and it's something seen as being within working class ideologies, and you can't cross a picket line. But crossing a picket line didn't bother Arthur Scargill. I can recall there were some women from working miners went and picketed his offices in Sheffield. Scargill did actually move the offices from London to Sheffield, so that was one thing to bring it closer to home. But crossing a picket line in that case didn't bother him. It wasn't a problem. So he himself, therefore, was the scab he accused others of being. Anyway, anything they thought might be useful to help Arthur Scargill and his union movement in the fight to keep those British pits open. I'm still proud to be in an Australian union and part of it, says Frenzel. And part of it all, but now the back of the Australian union movement has been effectively broken at this point. Gone are the days if one union on a site went on strike, the other unions did. Yes, and this is something I can recall. There was this joke, which I'll now repeat for you. Might make much sense in the circumstances. But to one trade union said, "Oh, I see the daffodils are out, the flowers," and the second one said, "I wonder if it will affect us," meaning the daffodils are out, they're in bloom, but they mean they're out on strike. Anyway, sorry, a joke I remember from the past. And for instance, I know it's effect illegal for a union to strike without first having gone to the so-called Fair Work Commission, a court more or less who decides whether or not the union has grounds to strike, and that's the way it should. But well, to a point. I mean, workers have to have the right to go on strike. I mean, there can be no doubt about this. I mean, I absolutely defend the rights of anyone to withdraw their labor. What I do not accept is the right of wealthy communists to decide who Scargill, who the current, or not the current, but certainly by about 2000, the NUM, the head of the National Union of Miners, said that Scargill would just use the NUM as his personal piggy bank. I deny the right of wealthy communists to actually force working people to go on strike for their own political ideologies. Anyway, so hello. It's morning on the US West Coast. Colin says this. Okay, I mentioned it, but my grandfather was a pitman and died of silicosis and pneumoconiosis. He never even saw 70. Yes, and this was quite common. This really was common. The black lung, the disease. I can recall this. I can recall friends, grandfathers from school and bed and things like this, and well, I won't mention some of the horrible things, but anyway, hello, and right. So Colin says, do I think Scargill has been vindicated by history? No, I don't think so, because certainly the pits have gone, but this is the march of history, and you have to accept that if coal is not needed anymore, then why keep the coal mines open? And I would have said that Scargill would have been if it had gone on for worker or let the miners themselves run the coal mines. Then I wouldn't have had a problem. I wouldn't have had a problem with that. But Scargill himself has not been the ideology which he believed in has been put in the dustbin of history, so to speak, communism. And it is true, of course, that the pit closures were even more than he thought they would be, or claimed they would be at the time. But to me, Scargill, anyway. Colin writes, the East Coast main line, that is to say London to Newcastle, was diverted because of the Selby coalfield. The old main line is now a lovely public footpath. I didn't know that. So hello, Elmer. Right, okay. Did Scargill visit Gaddafi in order to finance anarchy? I don't know. I can't answer that question. I don't know. I know that Gaddafi gave him a lot of cash, and the people turning up in the airport with cash on them in suitcases even was stopped by British customs. But I mean, okay, it wasn't illegal to bring in a suitcase full of cash, so don't know. Bear in mind at the time that Gaddafi was financing, for example, the IRA, and this was well known. There was no question of it. Anyway, Colin writes, the Battle of Orgreave sorted out the flying pickets as they fell into a trap laid by the police. Yeah, there's a place called Orgreave. I think, if I remember rightly, it was the 18th of June 1984. Orgreave was a coking plant. And if I've got this right, the police were the flying pickets turned up, and the police were very nice to me. So you can park your car over there, please go down there afterwards. And so they did what the police told them to do. And so the police got them in one place, and then they sort of attacked them, or some battle plan had been drawn up. And but it's a well-known battle with the police. I think the police, in my opinion, though, were not strong enough. I mean, when you got a situation where you'd have miners throwing stones at people. Now, if somebody comes in to a plant and a stone, there was it 6 people were killed? I can't remember, 6 or 4 people were killed. There was a miner who threw a concrete block off a bridge and onto a taxi driver who was taking people to work, and he was killed. And the criminals who did this were released from prison in 1989. I mean, this is ridiculous. I mean, when you murder somebody and then you 5 years in prison, what about the family of the murder victim? And when you throw a stone at a moving vehicle, then it has to be the consequence. What could happen could lead to death. And the fact of the matter is none weren't punished as they should have been. And when you've got anarchy which comes about, then that's not good. There were even situations where people, working people, had police protection, and you had plainclothes police officers looking after people who were working, and the wives of these people. And Right, Colin writes, the Tories contrived to split the miners by facilitating the formation of the Democratic Union of Mine Workers centered around the Nottingham coalfields. Yeah, so yeah, I can recall this very, very clearly. The Breakaway group, to miners who didn't want to be in Nottinghamshire, the mines were richer. They were more easily operated in than some of the others. For example, you had in Kent, which had really the very difficult to operate coal mines. But in Nottinghamshire, which there was a chance, I think, even that these mines could have stayed open much longer, and I think that was even suggested at the time, that the government would make a better effort to actually keep them open. I can recall a press conference with Cecil Parkinson, and he accidentally called them the Democratic Union of Mine Workers, the National Union of Mine Workers, and then he said, "This will be on the news tonight. I made this mistake," and there you go. 40 years later, and I still remember it. Have I seen the film Pride? Asks Colin. No, I haven't. I've never even heard of it. Never mind seen it. Right. Yeah. Colin writes, Scargill gets a very lucrative pension courtesy of the NUM. Well, yes, he does. He gets a huge amount. He had a flat in the Barbican in London, which I remember. I had a friend who had a flat in the Barbican. Oh, it was about the same time as Scargill was doing all this, and very, very luxurious development. But now the flat was costing £3,000 a month, and this is in the 90s, and Scargill, and it was being paid for Scargill by the NUM. It's just typical of the sort of I don't know if corruption is the right word, but the malpractice of Arthur Scargill. Anyway, Andrew says, right, remember the government sequestered the miners' strike pay. Sorry, I can't see the rest. In our house, sorry, it's a good one. Sorry, I can't see it. Hang on. Okay. In our house, we ate courtesy of the Soviet Union. Nice sausages. Right. Okay. That's a really interesting. Comment there. So you got the sausages from the. I've never heard of that, Andrew. So that really is, the sausages came from the Soviet Union. That really is curious. So okay. Anyway, might interesting here. Stuart asks, what's changed? Well, a lot's changed. I would say that the number one thing which has changed is that there are no coal mines anymore in the United Kingdom. The biggest thing which is that this battle, I think, Colin writes, a proposed new coal mines in Cumbria. This I would destroy. I don't know if destroy is the right word, but there weren't any major strikes. I think fair to say after this time. I think the strike was when what made people realise, particularly in the United Kingdom, but I mean I think even in other countries as well, that the power of these communist-run trade unions could be broken. And the power of the NUM was, the Scargill was based on the flying picket and mob rule and threats within small communities. Now, if this happened, for example, let's supposing you're living somewhere like London and you're working in an office and you're working for a big company or the government or something like that. The thing is that people won't know where you live and you can get into work okay, and if there were a big strike. The thing is it was in small communities where everyone knew each other, everybody knew who your relatives were, everybody knew which football team you support, and probably all support the same team anyway. Everybody knew you from school and everything, and that is how the idea of mob rule could be more effective. What was it like working in the pits after that? I'd be curious. Were those that worked some blacked by the others, or maybe they wouldn't speak to them or something along those lines. I don't know. I imagine the mine you must work on. There must be teamwork. I can't see how somebody can actually ignore others. To my way of thinking, I mean, I'm only now looking at this from a theoretical point of view. I've been down mines, but only on tours and things like that. I find mines very interesting places to visit. If I ever when I get the opportunity to go down a mine, I'm only too pleased to do so. But haven't been down a mine for years though. I haven't been down that many anyway. But I've never been really in a working mine, so I don't know. I've only been down historical ones, and there was one or two people in them. There was one mine I went down, a lead mine, in 2002. I can recall this visiting it. This was an 18th century one, but you had to walk it. I can't remember the name of the place, but it's a Teesdale. Anyway, so we had to. It was the tunnel was about 1.60 meters in height. So I was right down, but there was water up to my knees, and this was something I actually paid to go and visit a lead mine. And I can recall as a child I'd actually gone there. I was 16 years old. I'd gone there camping, and I'd set my tent up, not on the where the mine was, and although then of course everything was closed. Anyway, sorry, that was just something when it came to mind. Anyway, right, good. So thanks so much for watching. I hope we'll get some interesting comments from this. Obviously, I'm incredibly biased against. Okay, sorry, I'll just read this one here. The father, a very good friend of mine, was a pit deputy in South Shields, so that's area I know very well. And he said that the atmosphere after the strike was toxic. Yeah, I can imagine that it would be. I mean, within South Shields, of course, you've got a slightly bigger community in this, so it's not really blocked off. Yes, Nented. Well done, Colin. It was Nented. And I couldn't remember the name of the place. And yeah. So anyway, I'll probably go back to doing things of a normal nature. I've just spent the last 3 days doing some biography of a person called Herman Herfler, well known for a telegram which he sent about the amount of Jews who'd been murdered in 1942. So that's what I've been working on last 3 days, and I shall upload some other stuff before I'm done. Finished a couple of things on Heydrich assassination and Hedwig Potthast, who was Himmler's bit on the side as well as his regular missus. So I've done that. Thank you, Colin. Thanks everybody who was here, and I got that one out of me. I got that one out of my system, and which so thanks. Bye for now. Bye.